Good evening, everybody, and you're very welcome here tonight. On behalf of Atheist Ireland, I'm delighted to welcome Lilandra Ra back to Dublin. Ara was last with us in 2011 at the World Atheist Conference, which was co-hosted by Atheist Ireland. We are fortunate that Aaron has brought with him Lilandra Ra with him on this trip, and she is going to speak as well. Lilandra, who co-authors a series of classroom supplements called Living Science Videos. Herself and Aaron do them together. Lilandra is a curriculum specialist, and she teaches teachers how to use their science curriculum. She helped to found a group called Secular Asian Community. She has recently written an article on the meaning of race, and it is on the cover of the new Secular Nation. Put your hands together for Lilandra Ra.
Okay, I think I'm going to have to lean forward too. I didn't prepare anything because I was talking to Mr. Nugent last night, and he said, well, why don't you tell your story too? So, just forgive me if I'm improvising. Okay. I'm here from Texas, and Texas has very much been a part of why I'm a secular person today, and I wanted to tell you some stories from Texas. I know I probably don't look like what you would picture a Texan to look like, and I remember when I was in Australia, I stopped in a store, and there was a German worker there, and she's like, where are you from? And I'm like, I'm from Texas. She says, oh, you're a cowboy, huh? And I'm like, you know, she's sitting there expecting me to give her an answer, and there's no quick way to answer that. Not everybody in Texas is a cowboy. So I don't need to mess with anybody's expectations. All right. Now, I wanted to talk today about how people often accuse atheists of having petty concerns, and why can't you let religious people believe what they want to believe. And this is it's very much wrapped in my own story from Texas. Recently, even a progressive show like The Daily Show ran a segment where they were accusing atheists of being petty in America because Dan Barker of the Freedom from Religion Foundation was challenging a restaurant because they were giving Christian discounts. And that seemed very petty to The Daily Show, even though they aren't. A lot of times they criticize some of the theocratic people in America. And there are a lot. It's not that in America the only concern we have is whether we're going to get a 10% discount on our food as atheists. There are larger concerns, but I still wouldn't call even the smaller ones petty. I don't know if you have the same experience in Ireland where they're like, well, why don't you just let them believe what they want to believe? It's not hurting anybody. Why do you get in a group of atheists, to talk about what you don't believe, right? But there are, of course, larger concerns with religious people in America, like, for example, in Florida. The city of Miami is already starting to experience the effects of global warming and climate change. The sea level there has risen enough to where the seawater is starting to come in the streets, and store owners are having to deal with it where they didn't have to before. And just another 9 more inches, and the seawater will contaminate their drinking water. But in the state of Florida, the Republican leadership there, the Republican Governor Rick Scott, there's a kind of an understanding in the government offices that you're not even allowed to use the word climate change. I mean, Florida, was once underwater. So you can imagine that it is very close to the sea level, and of course a lot of people build their cities on coasts, and Miami's a major city. It also has a nuclear reactor, which they're like, don't worry about it, we built it 25 feet above sea level because hurricanes, right? But a lot of their peripheral equipment is not that high. So, and in order to understand this kind of like profound, not burying your head in the sand and not wanting to acknowledge something, you have to understand the mindset, and it's related to religious faith, that the Bible tells you all you need to know, and that if anything bad like major flooding happens, it's all part of God's plan, and God made the earth for us, and we're going to get a newer, better earth after we die. So they're not very focused on what scientists are telling them. And the ignorance is spread so far that one of our state senators, Ted Cruz, who's running for president, we don't know your representatives, but you know ours, and there's a very good reason for that, because Texas has given the world a lot of problems like George W. Bush, right? Yes. And so Texas is all of the bad things that you think about it. It is. And there's a lot of good in Texas too. There are a lot of good people. There are at least 4 cities with populations in the millions. And Austin, their motto is keep Texas weird, keep Austin weird. So they're kind of like this strange hippie enclave in Texas. And whenever we talk about Texas, people and the problems there, people are like, why don't you just move? I'm like, there's millions of people here, millions of good people. And the United States is the same. There's millions of good people in the United States, but unfortunately, only the kookiest people run for office. And they have a fanatical voter base that will keep voting for them. Whereas the more progressive people will argue and say, well, these people aren't progressive enough, I'm not going to vote. Conservatives, I'm going to vote. I'm going to run for office. And I'm going to support you with money. So I don't believe these people that you see and you hear about are representative of the entire United States. They are representative of a very active and incredibly ignorant part of the United States. And unfortunately, they're in charge of everything. And me and Arn, we oppose these things. Like recently, they adopted history books. And they're all about how the United States won every military engagement they ever fought in, and how we're the greatest ever. And don't bring up segregation, that's racial politics, you know? And also, the new history books with which the children will have for 10 years state that Moses was one of the people that inspired the American form of government. And everybody knows the United States isn't a theocratic dictatorship yet, right? But and hopefully it never will be. But I can tell you practically, in a lot of parts of the United States, it is basically a theocracy, which I think you understand here in Ireland. In Australia, I was like, I wish we could be where you're at, where religion is passé. But then there too, they have creeping theocracy. They have religious classes in their schools now. What their problem is apathy and getting people to understand that religion is a problem. And again, I'm talking to you about how concerns about religion aren't petty, and religion is causing actual real harm. I mean, I don't consider any of the small or the large problems petty. I just consider them problems. And anyways, I grew up in a suburb of Houston, Texas, where my parents were divorced. My mother's Vietnamese ancestry, and my father his white American ancestry. And they met during the Vietnam War, and I was born, and they moved us to Texas. This part of Texas gave us some of the most fundamentalist school board members that you probably heard about in movies like The Revisionists. Terry Leo, Don McElroy, who said that a lot of stupid things, but he said that we have to stand up to the experts. Yeah, and on the English curriculum, he said that we don't need multicultural English curriculum because the only Chinese you need to know is chow mein, which isn't even really Chinese. So I know it sounds astounding, but these people do exist, and they are these children. The history books I'm talking about, they were adopted, and the children are stuck with those books for 10 years, learning about how maybe Jesus isn't talked about that much, but maybe his principles are in our government, and they ignore the Enlightenment, and they oversell the Protestant Reformation. That they credit the Protestant Reformation as where our ideals that created America came from. But anyways, I grew up, my dad was a Southern Baptist, and my mother was Catholic. And when I say Catholic, in America, it might be different here. A lot of people think of the liberal Catholics or cafeteria Catholics. They believe some things, not others. And some people are to the extent where they're cultural Catholics, where they don't go except for maybe Easter to the services. But I grew up as a Vietnamese Catholic, so that was fundamentalist Catholic. I even lived with nuns. And whenever, and I don't mean to make anybody uncomfortable, but whenever they beat us, they would say, their thinking was that they were instilling in us a fear of God. And I don't know if you can, maybe even though it's from a different culture, it's the same religion, I grew up with a sense of guilt, that there was something wrong with me, because original sin, and I was filthy rags, and I was lucky if God saved me. And also there was a lot of sex shaming of women, that you shouldn't ever touch yourself. I mean, they were that concerned about your private sex life as a woman. And on the other side, and they would tell me my dad was going to hell because he was Baptist. And on the other side, the Southern Baptists would tell me the Catholics were going to hell because they're Mary worshippers. And it's an idol. And anyways, on that side, there was like, I internalized this sexism too, because every Mother's Day, the pastor would give a speech that women were the helpbeats of men, and they were there to serve men, and the man was your intermediary between God, and his authority was from God. So I grew up with all of these wrong-headed, internalized thoughts that basically treat women like they're grown children. And I was homeschooling my children in Houston, Texas, and I went on to a forum called Christian Forums because I was with kids all the time, and I want to talk to some adults. So I go to the Creation Evolution Forum, and Arn was there, and other atheists, and they were trying to convince everybody about the truth of evolution. And I was like an old earth creationist, because from the pulpit, the Southern Baptists were always mocking evolution, and I'm like, to me, it was like how only silly people believe that. And I even told my brother, who was farther along than me because he went to to a college in the northeast of the United States that, well, if we came from monkeys, why are they still monkeys? I'm embarrassed about that. But I had such a piss poor science education growing up in Texas that I didn't understand something as fundamental as that. And I argued with the people there because I didn't understand evolution. And over time, debating it, I understood it more and more. And as I understood it more and more, I went from old Earth creationist to theistic evolutionist, and then to deist. And then I started to realize, wait a minute, the myths in Genesis are no different than the myths everywhere else. They are all trying to explain the natural world using stories with gods. And why didn't I see that before? And it just dawned on me. And I had a nightmare that Jesus came to me, and it was like bright, shiny Jesus. You know? The one that's so bright and shiny, it's terrifying. Like, you can't even look at it because it's too bright. You know, it hurts your eyes. And he said, if you deny me before men, I'm going to deny you before my Father. So he's threatening me. Even though bright, shiny Jesus, he was threatening me. And that was when I realized that I was an atheist. And I already had problems in my marriage because that my husband wasn't a very good authority. And whenever you would give someone authority they didn't earn, such as religious authority, that you are head of the household, and you didn't earn that and you didn't prove that you're worthy of it, sometimes people become abusive that way. And also, I wasn't aware of it, but I had the mind of a grown woman, and I didn't like being treated like a child. And so I started, I got divorced, and my problems then really started because I realized I was an atheist in West Texas. And the only meetup group there was the Mike Huckabee meetup group. So I'm all alone in Texas trying to divorce someone who's making a really big deal out of the fact that I'm an atheist. And so I'm looking for an attorney. And the attorney, he asked me, I asked him, do you have problems representing an atheist? When I interviewed him, and he said no, because I used to be a criminal attorney, and I've represented child molesters, and I'm serious. And he was par for the course because that was West Texas. And I managed to prevail, but it wasn't over. There was a fight for 6 years. And one authority who's interviewing me said that I heard that you don't believe what normal people believe. And so I talked to her supervisor, and I was like, this is America. We don't lose custody of our children over religious beliefs. Freedom of religion, right? And then the person that was interviewing me denied ever having said that. I understand that you don't have that kind of protection under the law of separation in church and state, because I was talking to a few people at dinner last night. And so your concerns are different, and we do, but it's never been, it's in the history of the United States, it's never really been separate. The government has never really been separate from religion. They say that, and since the decision to remove teacher-led prayer from schools in the 1960s, people maybe are a little more careful to deny they're doing it. But I remember even after that, saying prayers at lunch in a public school. And not everybody knows that they can call them on that. And when they do, like recently somebody did, a principal was giving prayers over the loudspeaker every day. And then when somebody called them on it, He lied about doing it. But they recorded him. So that's how it is. It's still there, but they'll deny it, and they'll lie about it. Which, I mean, 10 Commandments, right? You should not bear false witness. But no, if it's in the service of God, maybe, right? I don't get the reasoning. But anyways, eventually I started teaching science because I learned a lot more about science, and it seems like science education shouldn't rank up there with people being denied an abortion in a life-threatening circumstance like you have here. But I don't say, well, this is worse, we should only do this. Everything's important. It's like vandalism. If you keep letting vandalize a neighborhood, eventually more crime goes in. So I know you can't be obsessed stopping every religious encroachment, but I do the best I can. And so I started teaching science, and in the classroom, I'd be like, hey, do you want to know how mountains form? And I get students who say, I don't need to know. God made mountains. So I'm flabbergasted at this because it's a fascinating process. And that's the harm there. It's not petty. It closes children's minds. It makes them incurious. It's a lot of children. I mean, I don't mean to generalize about every religious household, but in my experience, it makes a lot of children and adults incurious. So I just don't teach science. I started to realize after listening to creationist arguments over and over again, maybe some that I had made when I was ignorant, that there's a really basic misunderstanding of science here. If you don't understand why there's still monkeys, like, hey, why are there still wolves and we have dogs, right? You don't understand this, then you missed a very basic and required part of the science curriculum covering evolution. So I also write living science videos with Warren for people who want to maybe learn about things that they didn't, and also for people to use in classrooms to introduce their science lessons. And let me see, where is it going? When I first deconverted and I first married Arn, I was so excited about how atheism could change the world, maybe, because of all the wrongs that religion brings to the world. A lot of wrongs. I see it where I live, and I see it everywhere. Because what religion is it's authority, it's uber authority that's unearned and unquestioned. I get the feeling that the Catholic Church here thinks that they own public education. And for all intents and purposes they do, but they feel entitled to it. And they feel entitled to preach to other people's children. Because of this unquestioned authority. And they also interfere in people's lives, just like they do at home. And at home they're messing up even the world big time, because our climate change problems are the world's climate change problems. And not just climate change, or science denial. In Texas, there used to be 44 abortion clinics. And Texas is a state that's huge. It's about the size of Western Europe. And it has over 20 million people that live there. And there were 44 abortion clinics, but because of laws by religious fundamentalists, now there's 7. And there's none on the southern border of Texas anymore. Millions of women that have to drive 6 hours to go to an abortion clinic. And the people on the border a lot of times are hardworking people that can't get the time off of work or round up the money and they're trying to also impose waiting periods. So then they would have to pay for a hotel stay after they had that, and they just don't have the means. So it reminds me sort of how in Ireland, if you have the means, you can go to England if you really need an abortion. And well, that's good for if you have the means, but a lot of women don't have the means, and the ones who don't are going to get or who need them the most, because they need to plan when they're going to be parents. And maybe if they could delay parenthood, they could better take care of their children that they do have. And we just have these meddling politicians that are so concerned about what a woman does with her own body, and we get all of these bills on that all the time. Yet Texas and the United States has bridges that need to be fixed. One of them failed, and we don't focus on what government should be doing. We focus on what people are doing in their bedroom. Like in Florida, they had their law that said that gay people can't adopt children struck down by the Justice Department. And now they're trying to make another law that says the conscience of child placement agencies law. So if you're religious and it's against your conscience for gay people to adopt children, you can say no. And this little boy, he got up there to testify. He was like a little 8-year-old boy, and he said that when the social services found him and his brother, that his 4-year-old brother was begging for food for his 1-year-old brother and changing his diapers because the parents weren't active. And they placed them with a gay couple, and he said he had 2 dads. But then the agency decided, well, it's not right for a gay couple to have children, and they split the boys up because the older brother they thought was too old to adopt. So not only did they they take this loving family away from them, they took his brother away from him too, all so that they wouldn't be with a gay couple. And the little boy was trying so hard to testify. Minute was up, then the Republican legislature goes, "Your time's up," and that was it. He could have given him more time to speak, but he didn't, because to me, what these modern politicians, Theocratic politicians are like, they're like the Pharisees in the Bible. There was nitpicking the law, and I had to quote the Bible. Jesus said not that Jesus, we know that Jesus existed, or whether he said it or not. He said they swallow a camel and they strain out a gnat. They take all of these unimportant issues and they neglect the real issues, like a child having a loving home. And anyways, let me wrap up. Thank you for being patient with me. After I married Arn, I was so excited, and we went to Reason Rally. I don't know if you heard of the Reason Rally, but there were thousands of people gathering in Washington, D.C., and it was so excited. It was about 3-4 years ago. And we knew all these people from YouTube and all over the secular American community. Everybody was so excited for secularism in America. But what I've learned since is that atheism isn't going to solve the world's problems by itself either. Because I've had atheists lecture me on how maybe it's a woman's fault if they get raped and stuff like that. People whose opinions I otherwise respect on other matters, not just anonymous online trolls. So I think, and so what I would challenge people to do is also, in addition to being an atheist, examine some of these harmful cultural ideas that we come up with, and also be a secular humanist and care about human beings. And that doesn't mean that we only care about the major things. That means that we care about each other and stopping religious privilege and overreach in all things that we can. So thank you.